There's only 3 Mondays until the NFL draft will be here. Let's get into another Mock Draft Monday.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. He's James Rapien, I'm Jake Liscow, and today we've got another Mock Draft Monday for you. It's brought to you by FanDuel, where right now new customers can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. And James, it's fun to play through different scenarios in these Mock Draft Mondays. That's kind of the point of the exercise, is to take a look at what we think the best path could be for the Bengals if XYZ happens in the first round, and what's the butterfly effect, obviously, from there. And last week we explored a scenario where pretty much all of the defensive options were gone. This week we're going to hop into the A to Z Sports Mock Draft Simulator. This is a relatively new one that's launched this month, and it seems like there's a whole bunch of new ones coming out this year, James. But we're going to go into a scenario where in the top 10, we've seen Arvell Reese get picked as expected. Mansour Delane goes 7. Sonny Styles goes 8. Rueben Bain goes 9. And that's 3 straight defensive targets or potential targets for the Bengals going in picks 7 through 9. But that leaves us in a situation at pick number 10 where the top defensive options are David Bailey and Caleb Downs. We get to the scenario where I think there would be a split in the fan base, certainly when you get to a situation like you had in the Lance Zierlein mock that he posted over the weekend, where it was Rueben Bain, Sonny Styles, and Caleb Downs all available to the Bengals. Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles end up going a little bit later as the Bengals picked Rueben Bain in Lance Zierlein's mock draft, and you saw the premium positions, tackles, wide receivers getting picked in the top 10. That would be the scenario for the Bengals where potentially you would have some options at 10 between a few defensive players. And here we have to figure out, does it make sense to go for the high-end pass rushing upside versus Caleb Downs, who could be that playmaker all over the back end of the defense?
Yeah, for me, this is one of the best case scenarios you can have. And the Bengals would certainly feel this way as well. I would be stunned if in this scenario they did not take David Bailey and dance, pound the chair, dap each other up, jump up and down. You might see Zach Taylor do a box jump onto the draft table if you could get David Bailey at 10. And look, I don't think that he's this flawless prospect, but I don't think you care at 10. I think you look at this and you're like, all right, well, he's going to give you juice. You need juice. And yeah, Caleb Downs is a heck of a prospect. I think Caleb Downs is very much in play at 10. But part of why you don't go into the draft with a gaping hole at safety and a good safety class is because you don't want to be like, oh, well, we have to get Caleb Downs at 10 if he's there. You don't want to have to force it. And this is an example where, as great as Caleb Downs is, it's hard for me to see the scenario where he is the best player on their board in this scenario. I think there's a couple of things, like their history says they're going to have a really high grade on Caleb Downs. And I know that there are some that think that the Kyle Duggar signing, and I was thinking more about it over the weekend. Daxell was 11th on their board, 11th on their draft board, and they got him 31st overall. But they held him in really high regard, but they didn't have a plan for him. And obviously he kind of bounced around until he found a home. In this scenario, the plan for David Bailey is very, very simple. Give us juice on the edge and more juice and then some extra juice and be as competent as you can against the run. And so I think it would just be so cut and dry. Now, if the Bengals had Downs 5th and Bailey 10th, would they go the other way? I think so, but I think that that's a pretty unlikely scenario. And this is one of the best case scenarios where you get this premium pass rusher. He falls to 10 because of these other positions, these other needs that some of these teams have. And by the way, like the Browns taking Carnell Tate, that's very much in play. They need that. I would much rather them take Carnell Tate than David Bailey. I don't want them to add another guy that can hit Joe Burrow regularly. So yeah, if David Bailey could fall to 10, I think this is a pretty much a no-brainer, as close to a no-brainer as you get.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty shocking if David Bailey makes it to 10 just because of the pure pass rushing ability there. And he has questions. Like you said, he's not like a perfect prospect. He's not a Myles Garrett kind of prospect. He's not an Aiden Hutchinson kind of prospect because he's the second pick, and he might be. There's a world where the Jets go that direction and they don't pick Arvell Reese, or in this case, they pick Francis Mauigoa. I think those picks are probably flipped. It will be the chalk scenario in the first round right now. Mendoza, Reese, Mauigoa might be chalk to Arizona right now if we're talking about favorites. But the way that you get to this scenario for the Bengals is when those couple of wide receivers go in the top 10, along with Jeremiah Love and an offensive lineman. And that could happen. That could definitely happen. But I think it would probably be more likely that Bain, with his arm length concerns, gets to you at 10 than Bailey. But in the world that Bailey does get there, and the NFL does end up picking Rueben Bain ahead of David Bailey, as is the case here, and Sonny Styles ahead of David Bailey, as is the case here, I think it's really hard to make an argument that says maybe the best pure pass rusher in the class.
Yeah.
And speed rusher who's going to threaten the corner consistently. And when you start trying to take that corner away from him, he can run through you with speed to power. One of the best ghost moves in this class, has a flashy spin move as well that he uses often. And he wins with these moves consistently. And you saw that the effort ramped up in the run game. He's not going to be the perfect 3-down prospect, as you said, who's going to come in right away and be able to play on base downs for you. But if this leads to a package where your outside rushers on 3rd down are David Bailey outside, along with probably Boye Mafe on the other side, and then you can put Shamar Stewart and Myles Murphy in some combination on the field as well. Maybe Jonathan Allen is one of those guys on the interior. You can get a serious amount of pass rushing power onto the field in that package. And David Bailey is probably the linchpin of that at that point. And when there's a guy you can draft who can do that for you, probably take that. And I think that they have bolstered the safety room with a couple of guys, like we talked about last week, gives them the flexibility to make this pick and not have to think too hard about what they're missing. Who in another really good prospect in Caleb Downs.
Yeah, it's a good point because of they go get Brian Cook, right? If they would have just signed 27-year-old Joey Bosa going into a second contract, well, we'd be like, oh, well, you could go with Caleb Downs. They did that at safety. And so when this young, and I'm just thinking like, guy, I mentioned Bosa, like that's the juice he could bring, but he's healthier and has more upside and he isn't 31 or whatever Bosa, it's an obvious need. You can get him on the field. It's not going to stunt the growth of Shamar Stewart or Myles Murphy, and it's going to round out that room. So safety isn't their biggest need anymore. It doesn't mean they shouldn't address it or ignore it or pass on Caleb Downs depending on the scenario. But if this scenario plays out, this fills a gigantic void on the roster and makes them significantly better. So it's a win-win-win. David Bailey, welcome to Cincinnati. Hope you like Skyline, and I know you're going to like Graders.
I just like that there's no one else we're really discussing here because I don't think there's anyone else that you would. Like Jermon McCoy maybe is in the discussion if you're really expanding the candidates. And then the other guys available here, all the offensive players. Spencer Fano is really good. And if the defensive players are gone, should be in the conversation. Mekhi Lemon, Monroe Freeling, and Vega Ioane would be the next guys. But I mean,
Keldrick Falk is going to be mentioned too, of course. But David Bailey. It's David Bailey, baby.
That's a pretty easy one. So we're going to go David Bailey here in the first round and see who our options are in the second round coming up next.
Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up. Look, it is tough to juggle everything that you have to do, and you're still trying to find the right hire, make the right hire. Well, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is going to help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location. Bengals need pass rush. Maybe Indeed Sponsored Jobs can help them land a David Bailey-like prospect in the draft. But if you're looking for your cornerstone, your piece that's going to help round everything out, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the place to go. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed worldwide, according to Indeed data. All you have to do right now to find the right candidates is go to Indeed.com/podcast. That's right. Indeed.com/podcast for less stress, less time, more results in finding candidates that you can interview that check all of the boxes, all of the experience right now. Again, Indeed.com/podcast. And by the way, you're going to get a $75 job credit. So you can get your job posted and featured on Indeed Sponsored Jobs. All you have to do is let them know Locked On Bengals sent you. Go to Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Well, Jake, we have David Bailey. And so naturally, you address the pass rush. All focus is on the defense. Obviously, I'm always thinking wide receiver, but there's one name that certainly stood out available here at pick 41. Before we get to that, let's just kind of go over who's already been picked, who's off the board, and your guy, D'Angelo Pond, stands out. Cassius Howe, another guy that stands out. You want to talk about juice on the edge? He's someone out of Texas A&M that I want to mention because I think he would certainly be in the mix in round 2. I don't know if he even falls as far as he did, which was to pick 38 to Houston. D'Angelo Ponds, of course, he ends up in the division. Wouldn't that be annoying if he goes to the Cleveland Browns? Our Mason Thomas off the board in the second round. Ty Simpson fell to the Jets, picked 33 overall. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren would have been really intriguing at safety. Mm-hmm. He goes 37th overall. And so there's some guys, Colton Hood, the other Tennessee corner, goes in the 30s. So some guys that I think would be in the discussion in the mix had they fell to 41. They didn't, but a corner did. And CJ, I'm going to call him 3K instead of 2K. Chris Johnson out of San Diego State is on the board. And right away, that stood out to me as a favorite to be this pick because he fills a need. And at the same time, pairs really well with David Bailey in the Bengals' quest to add playmakers and solid prospects to a defense that needs more talent.
Yeah, and there's a significant cliff at corner after Chris Johnson in this draft. There's some other players that we're going to talk about that I think we're going to consider here and that I think you could make really strong cases for, but the strength of the prospect in Chris Johnson is probably going to take us in that direction. If Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is still available, Colton Hood still available, like if those guys get to your pick 41 and they're on the board, you're having probably a different conversation here. I think McNeil-Warren does force you to talk about him as well. In this mock draft, Dylan Thieneman gets all the way to 31 as well. And Caleb Banks gets to 29 in this one. So some defensive targets for the second round that if they're there, you would be talking about those guys, but they're not there. So we're going to talk about the guys that are. I do want to mention one offensive guy here at the top of the board. If you're watching on YouTube, you can already see this. Max Ahinichor from Arizona State would be the premier developmental tackle prospect who has the ability to be a really, really good tackle in this draft class. He had really impressive tape against the guy we picked in the first round, David Bailey. Like that Arizona State Texas Tech game is one of the first games I watched for David Bailey. And I was like, man, really? This is the guy we're talking about as a top 10 player. But David Bailey did eventually get his in that game. It just was a fun matchup with him and Ahinichor. And I thought that the Arizona State young tackle did a good job there. And he's like relatively new to the game and everything. And so there will be some development for him. And he could be a really good, I'm going to be a bridge guy. I'm going to be a swing tackle in year one, and I can be a starter and a really good starter potentially in year 2 and beyond. I think that the downside there is that he played right tackle, and so you'd have to figure out how comfortable you are with somebody playing left tackle between Amarius Mims and Ahinichor. But we're going to talk about the defensive players here because Chris Johnson at the top. There are also some interior defensive linemen that we should talk about, and Christian Miller and Lee Hunter, who I think would be in consideration here if we hadn't taken an edge rusher in the first round and we had gone with Caleb Downs, then you would be talking about Zion Young and Gabe Akers here. And then, of course, we're going to talk about linebacker. Anthony Hill, Jake Golday, Jacob Rodriguez are the top guys at linebacker. Josiah Trotter there as well at the linebacker spot. But do any of those guys warrant significant conversation compared with Chris Johnson for you, James?
No, I think it's one, it's what you went with in the first round in the pairing, but two, some of those guys you mentioned that went, like Caleb Banks, I think he has a better chance to be here at 41 than Chris Johnson. It feels like Chris Johnson has some momentum, but the reason why I think this is realistic is one of these first round DBs, and maybe it's a safety, maybe it's a Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, or it might not necessarily be corner. Maybe it's D'Angelo Ponds, your guy, who I'm not going to argue picking a 5'9" guy at any time, because more 5'9" speedy athletic guys in the locker room, the better, because I could see eye to eye and I don't have to treat him like Orlando Brown Jr. and look up high into the sky when I'm interviewing him. So selfishly, I'm down with D'Angelo Ponds, but I do think it's pretty realistic that one of these corners, like before the cliff, falls to 41. And when the Bengals do their mocks and their different scenarios, that a lot of times corner might not be the pick at 10. Could be, certainly, and we've discussed that. But 41 almost seems like the sweet spot where one of these guys, maybe multiple, fall and they can get one. And so for me, of all these options, and there are some good options, and I think it is reassuring when you think of the defense and the needs and all of those things, or if you want the swing tackle, which I certainly won't argue, even though it doesn't feel like that's necessarily their plan right now. Receiver, same thing. I think there's some fun receivers, but I think they'll wait there as well. And when you look at it, you tell the whether it's Al Golden, I was going to say the coaching staff, Al Golden or Chuck Burks or whoever in that building, hey, you're going to get Chris Johnson and pair him with David Bailey. Bolster your pass rush, bolster your coverage. I think that defensive side of the ball, that defensive coaching staff is going to be really, really excited.
Yeah, you got two premier players at their position, and I think that's obviously very valuable. I do think that the linebacker alternative is potentially compelling here, because there's going to be a cliff at linebacker as well, where if we go this direction in the second round, you're really hoping that like Josiah Trotter is available to you in the third round. And he's got a consensus 64, 65. On this board, I think he is 60. Kyle Lewis in the third round, also very interesting to me, but I don't know how they would see that fit. That's a different kind of linebacker, the more slot defender kind of player. But since we haven't taken a safety, maybe that's the direction they choose to go. If you're looking at safeties here, maybe they do want to look at safety here. We know they've got some interest in Jordan Stoops from Arizona, but Kamari Ramsey, AJ Halsey also would be in the conversation of this pick. Later on, you're talking Jalen Kilgore and Wheatley from Penn State. But that's the biggest one here that you would talk about if you were to go in a direction that wasn't Chris Johnson, would be like, do we feel comfortable with a different linebacker? Sure. If we don't get Golday to be the Sam linebacker, or Jacob Rodriguez to go out there and be the leader in that room, those two guys, or even Anthony Hill, again, to be like that downhill linebacker. If you're not getting one of those guys, who are you getting at linebacker? That would be the thought in my head here, because with corner, you're moving Dax inside. With linebacker, it's just, well, I guess we're going to really rely on those 2 second-year players again. But let's go Chris Johnson, James, and see what our options are in the third round. And hopefully one of those linebackers gets to us. Rodriguez is gone. And I thought that was the only linebacker I saw picked. Anthony Hill and Jake Golday at the top of the board here, which works out pretty nicely for us. And we can talk through the options, make a pick in the third round, see if we can get to a fourth round today. Coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, and the tournament, it's almost over. Hopefully UConn can complete it and handle business against Michigan. Yeah, shout out to Dan Hurley. We're certainly biased here on Locked On Bengals, but regardless, maybe you think Michigan's going to handle business, or maybe you're already thinking about the NBA and the NBA playoffs and what could happen. It seems wide open, especially now that the Lakers are dealing with the injuries they're dealing with, or maybe not. Maybe it's just OKC all the way. Maybe it's Victor Wembanyama leading the upstart, the young, the really fun and really talented San Antonio Spurs to an NBA championship. Regardless, FanDuel is the place to go to bet on all of the NBA action, all of the college hoops action. Obviously, Major League Baseball is in full swing as well. You can bet Just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The app makes it super easy to use. I use the FanDuel app all NCAA tournament long. I will during the NBA playoffs as well. So download the FanDuel app today, check it all out, and go to FanDuel.com to get started. Again, that is FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game.
Third round options include Anthony Hill, Jake Golday at linebacker, and it's kind of just worked out. We kind of just didn't get punished for not taking the linebacker in the second round. If you really wanted Jacob Rodriguez, then I guess you get punished a little bit there, but hoping for him in the third round at this point in the process after the way he tested feels optimistic. There are some other guys that we should mention. I want to specifically point out, not Brian Parker, who's highlighted if you're watching on YouTube, but Jayshawn Barham, who I think is too low on these boards. And if you're talking about a guy that can play that Sam role where he can be that surface linebacker, the role specifically that Al Golden has talked about, I think that Barham is definitely in the conversation and would be that hybrid defender that brings a really high level and intriguing skill set out of Michigan, plays like a Wolverine, like the animal, and also is from Michigan. But Golday, also former defensive lineman, very similar kind of role you would play Jake Golday in, that as you would play Barham in. And Golday, I think having his, or maybe did he have his visit with the Bengals over the weekend, James? Or is that just in headlines again?
I think it was in headlines again. It's a local, right? And so you're going to see these top 30 and all of these things, and it's a local. So I don't know exactly when, but they should be in on Golday, right? Like he does fit a lot of what I think they're looking for, especially at this stage. Like there's levels to it, right? Where like if Sonny Styles makes it to 10, they may address linebacker there. But in this scenario where you get a pass rusher, that's awesome, and then a top corner is there. Well, now you're in round 3 and you still haven't addressed linebacker. And you hope it works out this way because linebacker is a priority for them, but I don't think that they're going to necessarily force it. They didn't force it in free agency. And so, yes, I think they're very much in on Golday. Would be one of the favorites to be this pick, especially in this scenario. But Hill is staring at us too. And that's what's interesting is which flavor of Kool-Aid would they want? Because I certainly think that they probably go linebacker in this scenario, even though there's some other intriguing weapons, options, pieces on both sides of the ball at this stage of the draft. That would be interesting here at pick 72.
Yeah, it's like the younger downhill kind of player, stack linebacker. Anthony Hill is your guy, but Golday has the athletic toolkit to do, I think, the role they're interested in. So does Barham, and I think that Barham is also like right there with Golday in terms of who they are as prospects. And if Kyle Lewis is still there, then we should mention him too, just because I think he's awesome. I will mention Kyle Lewis pretty much every time we do one of these. I think he's a really, really interesting player, and we'll talk about him in depth when we talk about each position and targets by day of the draft. And we spent a lot of time on linebacker. We will spend a lot of time on linebacker when we get to that series as well. Some other names here to mention that I don't really feel like we can draft because of the situation at linebacker and how much pressure we're feeling to address the linebacker position. Jadarian Price, if he's there in the third round at running back, I think is interesting. And the Bengals are doing some homework on running back, mostly day 3 guys at the position, but not exclusively. Julian Neal, and there's another corner, Devin Moore, Keontae Scott. The corner depth really showing up here, and also Duke corner.
Chandler Rivers.
Chandler Rivers also there, and he's later on this board. I think that's a little bit late for him, but let's pick Jake Golday, shall we? And I just feel that pressure to go and get the thing that Al Golden talked about at the combine, and I think Jake Golday is really that guy.
Yeah, I agree. I would take Golday. I really want to make the case for the Skylar Bells here. Like if Skylar Bell's really there at 72, I want the Bengals to be in position to pick him, but they're not. And they need to continue to add to the defense. So like if you tell me after the first 2 days, if we're recording on Friday night and the Bengals have David Bailey, Chris Johnson, and Jake Golday, Well, I'll guarantee you, we might have to bring the woo back, Jake. I might hit the gritty. We might call Jamar Chase and have him give everybody gritty lessons, because the defensive help that they were looking for, they would have just gotten by addressing all three levels of the defense. So this is pretty close to like one of the best case scenarios realistically for the Bengals from addressing their needs and finding guys that should be able to contribute right away.
Well, we've got significant fallers really in each spot. Like I think David Bailey's probably going top 5, but if he's there, you take him. I think Chris Johnson, he could be there at 41. I think that it's a coin flip, I would say, at 41 for Chris Johnson. I'm not sure. Jake Golday, I think I'd be pretty shocked if he gets to the 3rd round. Not to mention to the Bengals pick in the 3rd round. But if he does, you take him. And so if you can snag those fallers and snag those fallers at positions that we really wanted to address, that's great. Like we haven't been able to get an interior defensive tackle or an interior defensive lineman. That's kind of a bummer. And that's the big thing we haven't addressed. Safety will be the other thing, where if you wanted that slot defender safety, but here in the 4th round, like Keontae Scott, talking about fallers, Keontae Scott is your slot defender. And that's the guy you're going to, I mean, I think you consider that very strongly here. Brennan Thompson from Mississippi State, the small slot speed yak guy.
Speed demon.
Like, I think you're considering that. Brian Parker, interior offensive line depth, most likely in the NFL. There's a number of offensive linemen you could talk about here. But if we were looking at safety, the top guys are going to be Bud Clark and Jalen Kilgore. Jalen Kennedy, also kind of that slot defender role. So if we're looking slot defender, there's some options here. If we're looking safety, there's some options here. If we're looking offense, Oscar Delp, the other name that I would throw into the mix, just scanning the names at the top of this list.
Yeah.
What direction do you want to go in the 4th?
Well, I want to go weapon. I'm going weapon here. I want a weapon. I want something on offense. And look, we've stuck the landing by addressing all 3 levels of the defense. I totally get it. Do you want to double up at corner? That's part of it. But man, Brennan Thompson and Oscar Delp, those are the 2 that I've really focused in on that I think make a lot of sense. Brennan Thompson, you're right. He's small, speedy, fits exactly what, if you're drawing up like the downfield threat portion of it, would work. Now, here's the problem. He's tiny, smaller than me. Speedy, smaller than me. And by weight, by like 25 pounds. And so what do you think there? What do you think of his return game? I think that's a huge question if you're the Bengals. And then you mentioned Oscar Delp. And I think that tight end in this range is certainly something that they should be considering. And if he's there, it's tough for me to pass on him. Like I think he's someone that you would look at and say, all right, well, he's got the tools to be a threat in the passing game. He's going to give you enough elsewhere. Let's bring Oscar Delp into our system and see if he can, even if he isn't super productive this year, be an answer for the future here at tight end. And that's where the mid-round tight end makes a lot of sense. And that's exactly what this is. So he stands out to me in a big way.
Yeah, I think the upside with Oscar Delp to be that all-round tight end is significant. He can block. I mean, the scouting report here, dominant inline blocker.
Yeah.
And untapped potential in the receiving game, but like it's there if you look. It's just like throw him the ball more, Georgia, please. That's kind of the
do the Bengals throw the ball? Do they?
You know, I think they should probably we need to go back in time. We need to pick Jadarian Price because the Bengals don't throw the ball. They're going to run the ball. We got to go get the tackle in the 2nd round. We got to get Jadarian Price in the 3rd round. Got to gear up to run the ball more. It's too many carries for Chase Brown and Samaje Perine. We need to get another skilled running back in there for the other 100 carries in this offense.
What is this? What is it? Don't go after running back now.
I'm just saying we need another 100 carries, James.
Don't do that. But to your point, like Delp could be that dude. And if you could get him at 110, now's the time. Like I know there are a lot of people that are like, oh, well, you still have to do this on defense or obviously this or that. If Delp's there at 110, assuming they haven't addressed tight end, hard for me to pass on him. And that's with Brennan Thompson just sitting there staring at me with his speed.
Yeah, I do think that as I pulled up some other positions here for those of you watching on YouTube, I pulled up defensive tackle, corner, and safety as well because they've got some of these slot guys categorized as corners. I do think that Keontae Scott,
Yeah.
Jalen Kennedy, and Jalen Kilgore are all quite tempting. There's not really defensive tackle here. And this is where, like, if you don't get the defensive tackle early, like Zane Durant, Caleb Proctor, later on this board, you would have to take them here if you want one of those guys. And if you wanted to make an argument for Zane Durant, you could very much do so here. If you wanted to make an argument for Caleb Proctor, small school guy, a lot of ability, you could certainly do so here. But if you wanted to pick an offensive player, Landon Robinson, the other one, Navy, maybe you can get him a little bit later, but we don't have a 5th round pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. So you're kind of last stop for a lot of guys before a cliff. So you can go Oscar Delp and potentially get that all-around tight end that he can do everything. You don't have to take him off the field, especially if he puts on like 5 more pounds. The potential for Oscar Delp really, really high. And I think a really exciting prospect. On the other side, I think Jalen Kilgore also a pretty exciting prospect. And maybe he can be that safety slot defender that you need. I think that is a real debate with those guys and maybe one of these defensive tackles. But let's have some fun and draft Oscar Delp, shall we? And get an offensive player here because we've added 3 fallers on defense that fit some holes. And people can yell at us in the comments about what we should have done. And all these picks, because I'm sure there are people that think we should have done something different at every single pick. There's going to be Caleb Downs, people out there that want us to pick Caleb Downs in the 1st round. There's going to be people who think this Oscar Delp pick is a D, like A to Z Sports thinks it is here in the 4th round.
Yeah. Sign me up for this haul. Bailey, Johnson, Golday, Delp, A. That's an A draft. I'm not listening to any simulator grade. Doesn't matter. If you could get this, if you could sign me up for this on draft weekend, the first 4 picks. And then guess what? Round 6 and 7, those are just gravy because you've just addressed needs with talented guys that all might be able to help right away and turn things around for the Bengals in their quest to get back to the playoffs. It's been a while since they've been in the playoffs, Jake. They need to figure that out.
I'm just glad that, yeah, I agree. I'm just glad that there's some guys that we really like in
Bailey, Johnson,
day
Golden,
3, round
Delp.
3, round 4, like some really fun names there still. And I'm really looking forward to our series too. If you're getting sick of the mock drafts, whatever, there's a couple more mock drafts before the draft. That's what happens this time of year. We have our positional deep dive series. Might be starting this week with tight end. And we're going to get into a bunch of positions, targets for each day of the draft with some fun guests. So looking forward to that as well. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.